Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I always like to take the time to welcome our guests because I know that they are coming with things that I deem very, very expensive and precious. And the first is time. And Steve, I want to thank you for coming because time that you are willing to spend with us and that this particular time that we are sharing, that it will become something of value. The other is your story. It houses much wisdom, much pain, defeat, strength, weaknesses, all of those things that make you you. And we are excited and honored that you're here to become vulnerable to share so that we will get to know you and taste of your flavor and your life. And we just want to extend the welcome to you. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. And tell the people the things that you have given birth to, Steve. As I mentioned to you, I tell the audience that we are creators and we create things, things that reside in us. We give life. And I want you to tell them all the things that you have given life to at this current space you are in your journey.
Yeah, it's funny that you refer to it that way. I've never heard anyone talk about it in that context, but I think it's a really great way to think about like how you create things is giving birth to them. So that's very unique. But for me, this stage of my career in life, I am a continuous improvement mentor and coach. I spend a lot of time in the Lean Six Sigma and theory of constraints world. For all of the data nerds out there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I do a lot of leadership coaching and executive coaching for director level and management staff in the organizations that I work with. And most recently, I had the opportunity and privilege to publish a book. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go. But the interesting thing for me about writing the book was having to kind of recognize that I had some beliefs about myself that I had to let go of in order to fully step into being able to write the book. And so it's been a really interesting journey of getting to the place where I am with all of that. And yeah, I spend as much time as I can out in nature because I believe being connected to the beauty of nature is a fundamental piece of my survival, and I think a lot of other people's survival as well. So that's a little bit about me and kind of where I'm at and what I'm up to. So I think we'll kind of unpack that as we go here. So.
Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. You had mentioned about nature, and I love nature as well. I think it is a place by which we can go and rejuvenate the inner man as well as the outside, meaning our bodies.
Absolutely.
But I believe it is designed to feed both. Let's go back, Steve, to your upbringing, because I believe this is where we are formed in the sense where our all of our belief system begins to become prominent. We began to make decisions based on these encounters that we have with our family and so forth. Talk to us about your family upbringing and how was that like?
So I originally grew up in a small town in Canada called Thunder Bay, Ontario. And I had an older brother. And, we didn't grow up with, the most expensive things or the most lavish, kind of things in our house. But we had enough. And, we were able to, make it through each day. Some days were a little harder than others. I had kind of a awkward, kind of relationship with my father growing up. He had some substance issues. And so
Mm-hmm.
that always makes, those relationships a little bit challenging to work through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that whole kind of situation caused me to really become my own person and really want to just have a lot of control over
Yeah.
where I went, what I did, because there really wasn't a whole lot of other support there. Like my mom did her best, but she was
Yeah.
trying to make it through life as well. And so it caused me to grow up fast,
Yeah.
which, can be good and bad. So,
Yeah. And we kind of sometimes, because of the situation, causes us to take on more than we should or ought to.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
as a result of that, we begin to make decisions based on that. And sometimes, as life goes by, it tells us that, yeah, we need to work on a few things. So, Steve, talk to me about the situation with your dad. And I know I could see that it is a sensitive piece. How did it begin to form your mentality? As you said, you mentioned about the fact that you had to grow up fast. How did you come to that conclusion, and what did it look like to grow up fast?
Yeah, I think it kind of like taught me the importance of, work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
Although I didn't have a lot of opportunity to, spend time with him because he traveled a lot for work
Yeah.
when I was growing up. And so he wasn't there a lot of the time. But then when he was there, some of the conversations would, kind of be centered around work and work ethic,
Mm-hmm.
which,
Yeah.
I did learn a lot about work ethic from him and
Mm-hmm.
what it means to, do what you say you're going to do. It caused me to realize that I had to like really take some ownership for
Yeah.
my path that I was taking, and that I couldn't rely on, other people to do it for me. So although, you could argue, well, if he would have been there, things would have been better. But at the same token, it did teach me to really own my path. And I think
Steve,
that's been,
how old were you when you were grappling with all of this type of decisions as as an individual? How old were you when you were dealing with this?
I think my whole life growing up, he had been traveling a lot. And so that was just the norm.
Yeah.
But I think it took me until I was like in my early 20s to really understand what it all
Mm-hmm.
meant, and really kind of like put some kind of context behind it. And, I think some of the, some of that situation kind of led me toward wanting to learn, a martial art so that I could,
Mm-hmm.
defend myself, build
Yeah.
discipline. And that's kind of where my connection to the Japanese culture started, was in my early teens. And so, yeah, I think looking back on it, I don't think have become the person I am today if I didn't experience what I experienced. And
Yeah.
I've always thought, all of the situations that we find ourselves in mold us into the person we are. Whether they're good or
I agree.
bad, it's just, it just is what it is. And so yeah, I think that was kind of the moment where I started making that realization.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think all of it makes us who we are. All of it, every
Hmm.
single part of it. It is able to form us and create us as we are today. When you began to walk into the martial arts, how did it begin to form your thinking, being exposed to a different type of belief system, being sure your sensei was incorporating some of those belief systems into you as you began to study this particular martial arts?
Yeah, I think, prior to that, I didn't have a lot of discipline,
Mm-hmm.
on my own. and I didn't really have a model of what discipline looked like in the
Yeah.
home. And so it really did help that for sure. I think the other thing that it did was it kind of really helped me with mindset, and it
Hmm.
opened up this idea that, I did have a lot more control over my directionality
Yeah.
than I previously thought. And that, so, all of that happening in the midst of everything else going on at home, I was finding some kind of, path through that.
Yeah.
Certainly wasn't perfect, by any stretch,
I
but
don't think anyone
yeah,
is any family. I don't think there's such a
yeah,
thing as perfection. And I think personally, Steve, I believe perfection is the enemy of growth because it keeps a lot
absolutely.
of
I
people
I
stagnant.
love that.
And,
I love
you
that.
know,
Yeah.
they're afraid to start, and
Hmm.
because they are looking at this perfection, and that's not reality. Reality is a little more dirtier and more
Yeah.
flavorful, I think, than what they would call perfection. I don't know if we will ever get there while we are here on this
Nope.
earth, because I believe we are put here to learn. And so we are all in this giant classroom. And it's really
Yeah.
interesting. You have some students that are excelling in it, you have some people that are failing in it. And
Hmm.
all of these things, you got a couple of people cheating just like a regular class school. So, we all have
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
and we have to learn how to manage it and so forth.
Sure.
So talk to me, because I know the reason why I stopped at the martial arts piece, because I know
Yeah.
I did that as well. I studied martial arts, and I know the how it and what it does to an individual. Did you become consumed with it, Steve, as you saw it as an individual and what it gave you? Did you become obsessed with getting into the physical aspect of it, or did you lean towards the mental aspect of it, or both?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it was a little bit of both.
Hmm.
I don't know that I got so, focused on the physicality side of it.
Yeah.
Because, the martial art that I studied was Ishinryu, which comes
Hmm.
from Okinawa, and it was really based more around self-defense as opposed to a more forward attacking kind of model. So it was really all
Yeah.
about that. And so I think, but yeah, the mental aspect of it all really, helped me understand that I was capable of achieving, thing. Like it really, kind of helped with that.
Yes. Yeah.
It gave me opportunities to lead also.
Hmm.
And as I was progressing in my study, I was being asked by my sensei to help, teach some of the younger students that were coming in.
Yeah.
And so it really gave me kind of my first taste at learning how to lead. And so it really, I think, it was a nice balance of both, I think, because the
Yeah.
physical conditioning, really helped, but also the mental conditioning, I think, was equally as important.
And how did it help you to navigate your relationships with the others outside of your class, those that are in your school, outside of your spirit, of your family, learning all of this, going through all of the things as you were going through at home? How did that mixture, Stephen, cause you to relate to people outside of the family? How did you manage that?
Ah, I've always I've always been a little bit more outspoken in my life.
Hmm.
And when I was a kid, I would say the absolute wrong things to the wrong people and get myself into a lot of trouble real fast. And so I think it learned how to navigate relationship a little bit better because
Yeah.
I was less antagonistic, especially to my brother and his friends. I originally started taking some of the courses to help me with that too, because my brother and his friends were quite large compared to me.
Yeah.
I was a small kid. I mean, I'm not a large adult either, right? I'm like 5'6", so I'm not like the biggest guy on the block. And as a kid, I would get picked on by my brother and his friends, and so I looked at this as an opportunity to like learn how to like, protect myself from that. But then I realized somewhere along the road that I was kind of instigating a lot of what was happening to me. And so I was like, well, wait a minute. If I stop, egging them on, maybe they'll stop, beating on me. And so it was, it was kind of like one of those moments where you're like, oh, wow. Okay. So you kind of, and that's where I think about like the learning how to take ownership for, my path and my action. That's kind of what I meant by that. It started teaching me some of those things, that it's like, maybe I'm inviting a lot of the, the problems. And so if I stop inviting the problems, maybe I won't have so many. And so anyways, yeah.
So as you began navigating through all of that and you're walking into your college age, as you wish, what field of study did you gravitate to, and why, Steve?
Yes. Originally, back in my, early 20s, college years, I had this idea that, I wanted to be in like the banking, financial, economics kind of space. Like I still do. I mean, I loved math when I was in school. That was like the only subject that I actually did well in. English was like the class that I think my teachers passed me just because they didn't want to see me the second time around. But I barely made it through my English classes. But math, I loved math. And so I figured, well, this is something that I can really like latch on to. And so that was kind of where I was originally, heading. And yeah, I, had thought that it made a lot of good sense. And so, but that was where I originally started. So a little bit different now,
what happened when you originally started it? What caused the detour or the shift in your perspective as to what was happening inside of you, number one, and what caused the decision outside of you to go in a different direction?
Sure. So there was a couple of things that happened, and I could talk for probably a long time about all of those things, but long story short, on a couple of them, I ran out of money when I was going to university the first time. And so, and at the time I didn't qualify for student aid. So I was like, well, I'm just going to just start working and figure it out later. And so that got the pause button pushed on it. And then a few years down the road from that, I was able to get a job working for a bank, and I actually write about this incident in my book. But one afternoon I was working and we were on a conference call in my manager's office. And have you ever sat in a room and you can feel somebody open the door really forcefully, just because the air pressure in the room just changes instantly? So I felt that change in air pressure. And right after I felt it, I heard our security guard yelling, "Drop the gun." And then immediately after hearing that, there's 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. And, all I remember after hearing the shots was diving over the desk, underneath the desk with a coworker. And, we had pushed the panic button that we had in the office and, immediately dialed 911. And, within it felt like seconds, our entire parking lot was full of emergency vehicles and, police, FBI. I mean, the whole, run of different acronyms that you can have for people that show up for that kind of an incident. And, we discovered afterward that the would-be, robber was shot by our security guard. And, the whole incident from start to finish in terms of when the door opened till he was, laying fatally wounded was 8 seconds. It took 8 seconds for that whole incident to happen. And that was a really defining moment for me because I had a really hard time going back to work after that. And, it took me weeks just to be able to get off the couch and stop hearing the gunshots because I kept reliving that whole scene in my head, and the whole incident just kept, like, it was on like repeat. It's like when you have a scratch in a record and it just keeps going back to the same spot. It was just like that. And so, I ended up getting fired from that job. And that was a struggle for me because I had really believed that I was supposed to be in the financial industry somehow. And after that, I was like, there's no way that I can do this. And so I ended up, going into a different line of work at that point. And so, so that's kind of where I let that whole path go and realized that I needed to be doing something different. So,
Steve, how did that? I know you said it prevented you from going to work and you were on the couch for a while. How did that 8 seconds? What did it do to you as an individual? Because that is a traumatic occurrence, if you will. And what did that 8 seconds do to Steve? What did it ignite?
Well, I don't know if it really ignited a whole lot of things, but it certainly it caused me to go into a shell for a long time, actually. I retreated into myself. I had a really hard time talking about the whole incident in general. Like, I just couldn't talk about it for a long time. I didn't seek professional help at the time, which in retrospect was a huge mistake on my part. Because it caused me to, I couldn't even really go to a restaurant and sit in the center. Like, how a lot of restaurants will have tables in the middle and then they have stuff around the outside. I would always ask for a table either in the corner or along a wall, somewhere where I could see the door. And if I walked into a place and that wasn't a possibility, I would just leave. I would go somewhere else. So I operated my life with a lot of fear for a long time. And so, it took me until like my later 30s to go and get some help. So I lived with that for a good 12 years without getting really any kind of resolution.
And Steve, what was it? What was it that you noticed that you saw within yourself, and you said, "Wait a minute, man! I need some help. I need someone to walk with me on this." What was it that you identified that you said, "Yeah, I need to do this"?
So it's actually kind of, it's interesting to think back about what things will like kind of trigger memory and trigger you to like make a different decision. And I had actually taken my dogs to the vet one day, and we're sitting in the office, and then all of a sudden there's just like a parade of emergency vehicles going past the outside. And like the way that the office was set up, it was like really close to the street, and so you could hear like them like very loudly going past. And I was like, what in the world is going on? And so, I picked up my phone and I was trying to figure out what was happening. And it turned out that there was a school shooting here in Seattle, because, that was where I was living at the time. And it was at one of the universities. I'm pretty sure it was Seattle Pacific University school shooting. And when I had, that whole kind of experience of hearing all of the emergency vehicles in like succession and just like, and then seeing what was going on television, it really triggered for me that incident at the bank. And at that moment, I was like realizing I have some, some traumatic, like, kind of reactions to what's going on here. And I didn't want to live that way anymore. And so that's when I reached out to get some help. And I found a really great therapist who worked with me for about a year and a half or so. And he did a fabulous job of really helping me unpack, kind of where a lot of that was stemming from. Realized in that moment that I was living like a victim, and I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to live that way. So
I know that earlier you had mentioned about how you sit in a restaurant and stuff like that. And believe it or not, Steve, it was because of my martial arts training that I would only sit certain area because it gave me a better view of everything and everyone. And I still do that today. And all my friends notice it, and they'll, we'll get to a table and they'll tell the person, no, don't sit there. Ken always sits there. And sometimes I realize that, and I'm sure I got to work through that as well, but it's just something that has been there. So here you are, Steve, you've gone through this traumatic situation, recognized that you needed the help, and tell people, the coaches and the people that are there to help, is to begin to ask the probing questions, to begin to investigate the reasons behind our actions. When you sought help and you gained that different perspective as someone was there to dig a little deeper, as you had mentioned that you wanted to know where that stemmed from. What were some of those things that you began to discover, Steve, that was residing within you that through these conversations that you're having, called your appointment, as you began to unpack the reasons, the whys, and the hows? What were some of those things that you've started to notice?
It's a great question. And I think it was in those sessions where I started realizing that I had let go of a lot of the things I had been taught in my martial arts training to, stay mindful of just my emotion and how I'm, moving through the world. I lost a lot of the discipline that I had built in my life. I really just let myself go. I mean, I was severely overweight. I could barely walk a mile, let alone run a mile. I had let go of a lot of the things that had really brought joy into my life. And I was just miserable. I was like, why the hell am I living this way? Like, this isn't okay. And so it was in those sessions that I just started realizing that I needed to start taking control over like the direction that I had for my life. And so it was like those moments where you just like, you feel, energized about, oh, okay, I can change this. And then you also have those like feelings of, why the hell did it take me so long to like figure this out? And so I was just like, well, whatever, let's move. Let's just move on. And so, but yeah, it was in those moments where I started realizing that like, I really needed to start looking back to understand how I needed to move forward. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And what were some of those tools, Steve, that you utilized to navigate you through and to keep you moving on? What were some of those tools that you utilized to, as you said, just keep moving?
Yeah, I tried. I've had a few false starts on it at first, but I'm much more consistent and better at it now. But I started, journaling and unpacking like some of the feelings and thinking that I was having that was going on, and really just getting it out on paper made such a huge difference for me, because I'm a very analytical kind of thinker, and the more things stay up in my head, the more it paralyzes me from being able to move forward. And so just getting things out made such a huge difference. And so I have a regular journaling practice that I do now. I've been doing it for a few years. Like every morning, it's like a part of my routine now. But that was one of the things that my my therapist recommended to me is to start journaling and to start, getting some of those things out. So that to me, I think was one of the biggest things. But then the other thing that he recommended to me, which has made such a huge difference now that I look back, is talking about it. Like talking about the incident, talking about what happened, talking about what I learned. And the more that I talk about it, the easier it becomes for me to talk about. And so, I mean, I think those two things were like really the keys for me being able to like break that pattern that I was in.
And some of those patterns, Steve, that you had accumulated in your life, what were some of those patterns that you recognized were there, and you were like, wait a minute? And I know the tools you mentioned, some of the tools that you use. What were those some of those patterns that you identified? And when you found it out, if you will, what steps did you took to begin to keep moving, as you said earlier?
I think the biggest theme for me when I look back and I think about it was, just really not wanting to live like a victim anymore. Because that was like so prevalent in my thinking and my mindset, like how I responded to other people in my life. I would always think, well, why are they doing this to me? And, why are they talking to me that way? And it took me a long time to realize that most of the time people are, doing things and saying things that have absolutely nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And, it was like so eye-opening when I made that realization that it's like, wait a second, like these people are just trying to live their lives just like I am. And sometimes, they're going to have a bad day. They're going to have things that happen to them that are causing them to respond to me in a way that, feels off or whatever. And so, I used to be very reactive to other people. And now, I think, although sometimes my wife would say I don't do a fabulous job of not doing that, I am getting a lot better at not reacting to situations. I think I'm much more able to pause first. It's like, okay, like what's happening around me right now, and just taking that pause and like allowing you to just evaluate the whole situation first before responding. So just getting out of that victim mentality, getting out of that reactive kind of pattern that I had. Those were, for me, two of the critical things, and really kind of getting me back to that idea of discipline and mindfulness.
And how, as you began to go back, if you will, you go back and you began to pull from the lessons and the insight that you got when you were younger from the martial arts, and you began to move forward after you were in this situation. How did you then, Steve, how did you navigate and move through? Because I know that pull is still within the being of wanting to teach and all of those things that were residing within you. What were some of the incidents that started to reignite all of those things that were sitting there? And how did it lead you to the book?
So I think, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was a few years ago. And I came to this realization when I was having a conversation with someone when, we were just kind of talking about a particular incident that I had like not reacted to a coworker when they had done something that anybody else in the organization would have probably like flew off the handle and would have been like, what in the hell? Like, why are you doing this? And and because it was a situation where they had like undermined my authority, and most people in my position would be like, all guns blazing and, just like out for, kind of blood. But I responded in a very different way. And I just had like a really honest conversation with the person. I mean, it was a hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
And somebody else witnessed it, and they were like, how in the world did you not lose your like composure? And I started talking about my study of the Bushido code at that point, because the way the samurai used to live, and the virtues that they followed, really resonated with me over the last few years. And so I just started talking about how, I really am striving to live with more harmony in my life. And to me, reacting to the way a person, responds to something is not going to bring me more harmony. And it certainly isn't going to bring them more harmony either. And so I had the opportunity to just talk about that. And then from that conversation, they said, you should write a book. And in that moment, I was like, you're nuts. I'm like, nobody wants to read a book written by me. I was like, I didn't really pass my English classes ever. So I was like, I just did not identify myself with that kind of like, title, I guess. And so I was just like, you're nuts. I'm like, there's no way. And then I think it was just like through my journaling practice after that conversation, I was like, well, I sat with it for a while. And then, last year around this time, actually, was when I started exploring that a little bit more. I was like, well, what would that look like? Like, could I actually write a book? And so it started, getting the gears kind of rolling, and that's kind of the genesis of where the book came from. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
While you were in the midst of COVID and we were all in that pressure cooker, what thoughts were you having concerning the book and, with yourself as a leader and coach? How did you manage your mind and in that time period?
That's a big question. I think when I first started kind of, writing the rough draft, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, nobody's going to want to read this. I'm like, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I was just like, well, I'm just going to, I'm just going to do it. And if I don't publish it, at least it was just like an experience for me to go through. And so I was kind of approaching it from setting the bar really, really low so that it would be easy to jump over kind of thing. Right. And then I took a chance and I let somebody read my rough draft. And that was like super scary to have somebody do that. And their response was, this was really good. And I'm like, you're reading the same thing that I'm thinking about, right? And so anyway, so I think it was that moment where I had a little bit of validation from somebody that, hey, this is actually a really good topic and a good idea to talk about. And it was at that moment where I was like, all right, well, let's just kind of see where this goes. And after I made a few revisions to the rough draft, I hired an editor that, has a lot of experience with editing and writing and publishing books. And it was a fabulous experience to have found him, because he really helped me organize my thoughts a little bit better. And it was funny because the first round of edits that I got back from him, it felt like I was in English class all over again because there was so much red. It was just like red marks everywhere. I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But it was a really great experience and I learned an awful lot. And he was a fabulous person to go through this journey with. So yeah, it was really
I know. I've interviewed so many people that were in that same space you were, and how they had to deal with what they called it the imposter syndrome. Are you kidding me? Who am I? And all of this stuff, and that place, how scary it was, but yet how to combat that and move forward in that was that they had to let go. And it's really interesting to hear it coming from you as well. And I tell people
Yeah.
this. This is my take on life, Steve. I think that the principles are all there. The same principle, the Bushido Trade principles, those principles were there thousands of years. And all of the
Mm-hmm.
different principles, the Vedas and all those things are sitting there. But I believe that each one of us on the planet has to go through their journey, and the journey will bring them to those principles, but it will bring them to those principles through their journey, and
Absolutely.
they have a different take on it and a different perspective, if you wish. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe with all of the different perspective as we all go through these journeys and we present them in books, and it paints this beautiful tapestry, and it gives us an opportunity to widen our vision as to all of the different principles there, and we can get a glimpse of it from religious point of view, from a cultural point of view, from all these millions and billions of people that are on this planet with their own take on it, man. To me, Steve,
Absolutely.
that makes life so exciting because you're like, I want more of that flavor to be coming and be exposed. So I know one of your things that you do, and those that are listening to Steve and I want you to go and buy his book, get into his space. I will also provide those things for you guys to have access to Steve, because it is important. And I tell everyone, when you purchase a book, you're having a one-on-one conversation with the author. You're talking to Steve. You're listening, and you're having this exchange of energy, because there's
Mm.
energy that is on those pages. And those that are ready, you would be amazed that those words will leap from those pages and jump into your spirit and begin to usher you into your next space that you need to do and grow as an individual. And I'm sure Steve will make himself available anyway for you guys to reach him. And I know he has a coaching aspect as well. And I want you to talk about that, Steve. I want you to go back and pull one of your folks that you dealt with, and when you were talking with them, having that conversation as your therapist did with you, and as you were
Mm.
having those conversations, that when though you remember and that person you had there, they got it, if you will, Steve,
Mm.
when they began, their eyes began to get wide, and you see that smile on their face. Some people smile, some people cry. It's an emotional space. Pull
Mm.
one of those out and tell us about it when someone arrive at that bus stop, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just as a side note, what's interesting, you had mentioned like reading my book so that you can have a conversation with me. That's actually how I wanted to write the book. So when you read
Yeah,
it, it kind of feels like a conversation. So
yeah,
it's really interesting that you had mentioned that. But for me, I think there's a particular moment with one of the leaders that I've worked with, where they were struggling big time with
mm-hmm.
trying to meet the demands of the position that they were in, struggling to kind of understand what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, right? Like they were
Mm-hmm.
just they felt like a fish out of water because they were
Yeah,
new to the position. They weren't really sure if they were being successful. So, we just started sitting down and kind of working through how could you take more control over this situation, and how could you find more, of a kind of like ownership of your path. And,
yeah,
they had, they had worked with me for about 5 or 6 months. And there was one, cause we had regular calls that we had set up to check in and kind of see how they were
mm-hmm.
doing and where they're at. And
Yeah,
for the longest time, it was just like the same thing, right? It was just like,
yeah,
oh, there's just so much going on. I feel overloaded, da da da. And then there was this one day where we get
mm-hmm.
on the call, and I asked him, I said, so how are you doing?
Yeah.
And his response was, I'm doing well. And I was like, what? Like, this is very different from how, you know, you used to respond. And
Yeah.
his his reaction to that was, I know, but I had this like realization over this past week. And his whole demeanor changed.
Yeah.
Like it was like those, you're standing in a dark room with like no light, and then all of a sudden somebody lights a candle and you're like, whoa, I can see where I'm supposed to go. And then all of a sudden somebody turns the lights on and then you can see the whole room. Was kind of like his journey, right? Because the candle was there and he was starting to make some progress, but then all of a sudden it's like the power came back on. And you could just see it in how he led his team. He just really shifted from that same kind of like victim mentality that I had, although it was a slightly different context, obviously, because we're talking about a work environment, but it was the same kind of premise. And so I was able to like work him through that based on my experience of working through a similar kind of thing. And, you know, that's kind of the reason why I love doing the work that I do. It's helping people unpack some of the things that are holding them back and really helping them find a path forward. It's kind of like I love, you know, climbing in the mountains and being in nature. And I have this like, this like funny retirement goal of like being a mountain guide when I retire from work, which is kind of like weird for a lot of people to think about. But I think about, you know, coaching a lot like being a mountain guide, right? Like I'm not going to carry you to a top of a mountain. That is not going to happen. But I will show you the safest way to get there.
Yeah.
And you can walk right behind me. You can follow in the steps that I take. You can, you know, do exactly what I do. And it's kind of like, I think about coaching in that kind of context. Like, I'm going to help you get to where you want to go. You have to be the one that tells me where you want to go, though. I'm not going to tell you, you know, what mountain to climb, but I can certainly help you climb it. And so, anyway, I think that's, for me, that's a huge reason why I love doing what I do, is just seeing that like moment where they get it. And it's just, you can see the transformation all over them at that point.
It's a powerful place. One of the things that you mentioned, I look at just as that the same comfort you are able to comfort someone because you've been through something similar. And that means that when you speak, the words that you speak will be spoken with power. The actions that you do will be done in power. The questions that you ask them will be done from a place of wisdom, because you're familiar with it and you know the type of question to ask to bring that outcome that you know ahead of time that they need to know, but you can only ask the question, cause them to dig deep. And that's what you do. And it's a powerful thing to do because you help them to excavate those inner parts that are in them that is there. And you know the questions because, Stephen, you were there before. And so you
totally
are familiar with it and you're able to help them. I want to thank you so much, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment and sharing your journey with us and trusting us with this information. Again, those that are listening to us, get in touch with him, purchase his book, give them as gifts because we want to grow the family of people so that they can become better human spirits while they're here on this planet, man. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I've been an awesome conversation. I love, you know, taking the time out to be with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.